And if you're going to win souls, you've got to love souls. In spite of their meanness, in spite of the way they look, in spite of everything, you've got to seek to bring souls to Jesus Christ because you love them, because Jesus loved them, and because Jesus died for them, and you're trying to bring them to the Son of God.
Welcome back for another episode of Sandy Creek Stirrings. Of course, I am your host, Joshua Jimenez, and I want to thank you for joining me here on the podcast for another episode where our goal is to stir up Christians for the cause of Christ through practicality, reality, and sincerity. And so without further ado today, I'm not going to talk about, sending in a question on our contact page or liking us on Facebook or reviewing us on Apple Podcast, even though those are kind of passing by commercials for the podcast. I'm going to skip those today, and we're going to get right into the episode content, which, seems to be a pretty common theme here on Sandy Creek Stirrings. A lot of times it seems like we have big, important things to talk about, and but today is really important. You see, today I am sitting across the table from the most beautiful lady in the entire world. And she didn't know I was going to say that, but I did say that, so there's that. And yes, it's on live audio recording, and I guess it's not live if it's a recording, but anyway. And so I'm sitting across the table from my wife, and so say hello.
Hi.
There you go. And so my beautiful wife, and thankful that she was able to join me today. And of course, we've been announcing that we're doing an episode entitled 3 Newlywed Focal Points. If that ended up being the final title or not, I don't know. It'll probably be edited between here and there. But 3 newlywed focal points, or I don't know, maybe 3 focal points for newlyweds. And as I began really sitting down and talking about Sandy Creek Stirrings and preparing some things for that, Tabitha was really my filter. And she was really who I ran it through. If there was anybody who was a big influence on me, starting Sandy Creek Stirrings, it was Tabitha, and so you can thank her for that. And so when we sat down and I began talking about this, I said, I really think that there would be some usefulness in having an episode that deals with some areas of newlyweds and talking with, about those things, and maybe some things even that we learned from our personal experience in the beginning of our marriage that maybe we could share with some of the listeners, whether, a newlywed, maybe, what do you call a non-newlywed? An old wed? I don't know what you call them, but what can help them in some areas that we struggled in. And not every couple is going to struggle in these areas. But the more I hear, the more I read, the more testimonies and examples I hear, these are areas that it seems like a lot of marriages struggle in. And so it's something that we had to learn. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Have we completely figured it out? No. Yeah. But we still have a lot to work on. But if we can give you just a little bit of applicable wisdom, I feel like it could be a help to you. And so we sat down, began preparing some content on this, and so here it is. What we record today will really be what is produced to you, and hopefully it's a blessing and help to you. Before we actually get into content, I want to first talk about how we met. And some of you have heard my testimony of how me and Tabitha met, but I want to briefly give it while she's here. That way she can fact check me and keep me in check about everything. So I was 18, and I think I just turned 18, and this would have been June of 2014, I think, probably July, something. It would have been, I think it would have been mid-June, and probably right after my birthday, maybe even before. And I was at a preacher's conference at my home church at the time, Winkler Road Baptist Church of Fort Myers, Florida. And I was in charge, or I was helping that day of running the sound, running the back room recording. And I remember a friend of mine, and I was, I'd graduated high school, and he was still in high school, but me and my friend were in the back in the sound booth, doing what any two teenage guys do together, it seems like. There was a tour group in from a college, so we got there early, to see if there were any pretty girls. And it just, frankly, just get down to it. And so we were there, and we were looking, and none of them fit, the bills. So we were just standing there doing whatever we did, cracking jokes and stuff. And all of a sudden, Pastor Jay Shepard from Tri-City Baptist Church in Port Charlotte, Florida, walked in with some members of his church and some members of his youth group. And so in walked this beautiful, beautiful young lady. And I remember I looked and I said, wow, she is beautiful. And I told my friend, I said, man, she is really good looking. And so ends up that, things just worked out. I was a shy guy. I did not talk to girls. So no, I did not talk to my wife, future wife, that day. And she actually sat, interesting enough, she sat at the table for the meal that day at the preacher's conference. She sat with my grandmother, with my little sister. Didn't even realize it. And but anyway, I saw her. And I happened to get my hands on, a few weeks later, I got my hands on a letter. Maybe 2 weeks later, maybe a week later. It was a week later. And it wasn't a week later. And I happened to get my hands on a letter. Why don't you tell us, Tabitha, go ahead and give you a chance to talk and get past the giggling and everything. And why don't you tell us how I happened to get a letter?
So, Josh's friend was actually the one who took interest in me, and so before I knew it...
Whoa. Let me stop you there. Well, I took interest in you, too. He tried to steal my girl, is what he tried to do. So anyway, go ahead.
So he ended up talking with one of the men who went to our church, and the man from our church ended up telling me that this young man was interested in me. And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to talk to my dad. So I talked to my dad, and he said... Because this friend, Josh's friend, was the one who invited me to a softball game. And so I talked to my dad, and my dad was like, no, you're not going to a softball game. So I said, okay. So for me, I had to figure out, how do I tell this guy that I'm not going to a softball game? And so I ended up writing him a letter. But in the letter, I told him, I gave him my testimony because he didn't know anything about me. And so I gave him my testimony, and I just said, if you'd like to get to know me more, you can come to church. You can get to know me through church. And then I said, oh, by the way, there's teen camp that's coming up. And so if you want to come, here's a brochure. Go ahead and fill it out, and then we'd love to see you.
So, yeah. So I remember on the bus route, I had gotten that teenager. He was riding the same bus. We were working the same bus route and at the church. And so he had that letter with him. And I said, you got a letter? He said, yeah, I got a letter. And, I was kind of sad. And so he's like, I got a letter. And so he's like, I remember him saying specifically, she's really spiritual. And so I found that interesting. And he said, she invited me to teen camp. I'm not going to go. And so I said, well, can I read the letter? And at first he's like, no, because, he don't want to lose her either. And so I said, let me read the letter. And so I read the letter, and people can say whatever they want. It really doesn't matter. But I remember after I read that letter, it's like God settled in my heart, this is the one for you. I had no doubt about it. And my mom can testify to that because late one night she came to check on me. I was laying in bed, and I had that letter. Chandler had given it to me. I don't know. I think I may have given that letter back to him, surprisingly. That is weird. And so I remember I had that letter in my hand, and I looked at my mom. I said, there's just something different about this girl. Now, I didn't tell my mom this is the one for me because, she'd think I'm crazy. And so, but I said, there's something different. My mom remembers that point. But so teen camp came along. I wanted to go to teen camp. Nothing was working out. It was a week before teen camp started. I wanted to go, but, how was that going to happen? And so I didn't even, truth be told, I barely knew your pastor at the time, Pastor Shepard. I barely knew the church. Mm-hmm. They weren't super familiar with us. So it's not like a church I knew or had a lot of contact with. So I thought, how's this going to work out? And so I remember my mom and dad were coming back to town. They had been out of town for a doctor appointment. And my dad got in. I think it was literally the day before camp.
Wow.
I think that the day or maybe, no, I'm pretty sure it was the day before camp. And he got back and he said, hey, I called Pastor Shepard. And my dad knew very little about it. And if my dad knew that a girl was really involved, I really don't think that he would have thought about it too much. But he said, I called Pastor Shepard, and you guys are going to go to teen camp tomorrow. And so we packed bags, and we got there. And I remember I got out of the whatever we were driving, and I got out, and I saw Tabitha crossing the parking lot. Of course, I thought she was beautiful. But come to find out, I think she'll tell you this now, her first impressions of me weren't the same impressions I had of her. So why don't you go ahead and tell them.
So when Josh walked in, I didn't notice him pull up, but when he walked in, He walked in with Beth and Brenna, and I just remember
My
sitting
two
there.
sisters, in case you're wondering.
Yes.
They weren't like two other girlfriends. They were my two sisters.
That would have been terrible. But I was at the registration table and with my mom, and they walked in, and we had heard that these missionary kids or someone was visiting, a family from another church was visiting our church. And so we knew, since it was a smaller camp, that these were probably the teenagers. But when they walked in, I just looked at Josh and thought, man, they look like homeschoolers. Like, he really looks like a homeschooler.
I think the phrase you used later on to tell me about this was they look like typical homeschoolers. Now, I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean, but like, you were homeschooled too. So.
Yeah, I know. So
but I guess I look like the typical homeschooler. And so, needless to say, she didn't like me very much when we first met. And so I won her heart. Amen. Over the week. And so things just went from there. I won't go into detail on what all happened that week. If you want to hear more, how about you sound off in the Facebook page, and maybe we'll do an episode a little bit more on what actually happened. But at the end of the week, I asked her, I said, can we write letters? And some people say, that's really old fashioned, and maybe it is. But for some reason, whatever reason it was that we decided to write letters, I'm glad we did, because in a box, we have all the letters that we wrote each other. And just very precious.
It is.
And so I told her, we'll write letters. I was leaving for Golden State Baptist College. I was 18. She was 16 at the time. And so I wrote her a note promising that I would not date any other young ladies unless God distinctly told us that we should, not be together.
Right.
And so you've heard most of my testimony as far as me. God moved me back to Florida, of course, 4 hours north, 3.5 hours, 4 hours north. And but we continue to write letters. I'd go down once a month and see Tabitha sometimes after work. I would get off work maybe early, like at 3 o'clock. I would drive the 3.5 hours down. We'd eat dinner. We would talk, we'd watch a movie, and then I'd drive back. I'd get back at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, get up and be at work at 6:30. And but it was worth it. Amen. And ended up proposing on July 21st of 2016, Tabitha's birthday, and proposed, and we set the date. When did we set the date for? Tell them a little bit about the wedding.
We ended up setting the date for January 6th of 2017. It was really exciting. I remember we had 6 months to get ready and to plan everything and just to set the date and to get things ready for the big day. And we were going to plan it outside, but ended up raining that night. And so we knew that the forecast was changing, and so we knew we had to move it inside really fast. So it was a beautiful wedding. We ended up doing a lot of different and fun things, but I mean, it was special still all the same.
Right. And your dad did a lot of good decorating with your mom. And your mom, I think, headed up all the decorations and everything, did a great job with that.
Awesome job.
I remember the night before our wedding, helping your dad string a couple of the light strands.
A couple?
A couple, because I left before they were all done. And, there was a lot of lights. If you want a picture, we'll send you a picture. There were a ton of lights on my soul, and which made it great. Looked very nice in there. So really, the rest is history. And we have 2 girls, one on the way, and so Liberty Ann, Freedom Joy, and according to the ultrasound, this is a girl, and so we're looking at Victory Bell on the way, not like B-E-L-L, well, that'd be Beal. B-E-L-L, it'd be B-E-L-L-E, Bell,
Yeah.
And so, but we got one on the way, we're saving for a house, God has been really, really good to us. So for the actual content, though, of the episode today, as we began life as a newly married couple, as for any couple, it was really an adjustment. Things were wonderful, but aggravating at the same time. In some points, not in every points, but in some points, things could be both wonderful and aggravating. Marriage just in general, it's different. So we began to learn some things as we continued married life, and, as we sat down and began to, pen some things out on what should newlywed couples prepare for? What should they be ready for? What should, this is for newlyweds, and I feel like we're pushing it towards newlyweds because, frankly, we've only been married in January of 2021. We've been married 4 years, and so I don't claim in any way to be a marriage expert. Not in any shape or form. And so I'm not going to go to an older couple and tell them how to run it. I can tell, some things from the book, from the Word of God. So the Word of God allows you to teach some things that maybe you haven't experienced yet. But, I'm not going to claim to be a marriage expert. So I'm not pushing this on every couple. I'm kind of more pushing this towards newlyweds. But really, as any couple, you can get something out of this, I feel, today. And so if you've been married and you're just looking for some advice, these tips that we're going to talk about today, they can be applied across the board. And so why don't you, Tabitha, tell us about the first area? And so we've got 3. Why don't you tell us about the first area that we had to learn about? We struggled in, we had to work on. Why don't you lead us into that?
I think the first one would be communication, just learning to just talk things out and to just talk. I think that was the first thing. We were the opposite of most couples. Most couples, when I read marriage books or I hear stories or whatever, it's always the woman that's the talker and she wants to talk things out, and it's always the man who is quiet and just gets easily frustrated and just sits to himself. But we were the opposite of that. I was more of the one who was more quiet and more reserved, and Josh was the one who wanted to talk and talk about all of it and everything. And that for me was very different because I was the one who didn't want to communicate. I was raised a little bit different than Josh was. Josh was raised in a home where you talk about absolutely every single thing.
Yeah, we took the talking level, like not normal talking. We took it like to a different level. Like we were over talkers.
Right. Which is good. But in my home, we grew up where, if someone asked how was your day, you would say good, and you would just leave it at that. Whereas Josh's family, it was more like, how was your date? And then
good.
What did you do
brushed
today?
With Colgate toothpaste today.
Yes, it's just very different. So the biggest thing for me was that I had to learn to just talk and to just get everything out and just
Right.
I think that was the biggest struggle for me.
In this first point, on communication, I think the biggest thing, if we can say anything, is just talk. I don't think it really gets any simpler than that. We could go on and we could write it. People have written whole books on communication, and good stuff. I'm not saying that's wrong, but if you can get anything, just talk. And as simple as that sounds, it's not always simple to do. But I really think that sometimes something to remember is that in your married life and just in life in general, but especially married life with your spouse, your confidant, your best friend is who that spouse needs to be, your wife or your husband. If you in yourself, you're saying to yourself, I need to bottle it up, I'm going to keep it inside, I need to don't talk. Typically, that should raise a red flag telling you, ding, ding, hello. I need to open up and talk to my spouse about this because I'm not wanting to talk. And typically, unless it's something stupid like, men, like you're in your brain, you're thinking, oh, she's fat today. That's a good time not to talk. Okay, don't say that. But I think in general, you get what I'm saying. If you're in a conversation where you need to let loose and you're like, no, I'm going to keep it inside, that's the time where the little red flag raises, and you need to just go ahead and talk to your spouse. And so I think something that you need to remember in this aspect of talking and communicating is that learn that what you say, it can make a difference on what was said. How you say something can make just as big of a difference of what you actually said. For instance, you can say something really nice with the wrong vocal tone, and it can come out completely wrong.
Right.
And I think there's a couple things that really can affect the way you say something.
Right, like maybe your facial expression or what you're focusing on, like if you're doing the dishes and you're not really paying attention to him while he's telling you something, or if you're on the computer doing something for work and it's just you lose your focus.
You don't have to bring up any personal examples from today. It's okay. And
but I feel like all of this can affect what you just said. So it can leave the spouse or your husband or your wife or whatever feeling like you don't really care. You're not really listening. And I think as ladies, a lot of that can be said for us. We have this thing called It's Not About the Nail, where we just want to talk and just chat away. But I think for us, we need that focus. We need that focal point too. We need to see your eyes on us and just to know that you're listening.
Yeah. And I think that's important for husbands as well. And I'm not going to claim out there that every wife is like Tabitha, every husband is like me. But in general, for me, and I don't know if it's like this for other husbands, but for me, what I've found is Tabitha can talk, and I can say at the right times, and oh, that's nice. I can say all those things at the right time and be thinking about something completely else. And I could have figured out a jigsaw puzzle while she's talking to me because I'm not actually focused. The best conversations we've had are the ones where I push everything aside and I focus on her. And, I think I could save myself a lot of trouble a lot of times and us getting into discussions.
Right.
If I would just do a better job at focusing. It's easy. Okay, it's easy across the board, whether it be at work, at church, whatever. Sometimes it can be easy to tune somebody out, think about something else because you're just trying to get through the end of the conversation so you can move on with your life. And you can't do that in marriage.
Right.
Because just as important as talking is listening. And so something else that was big for me in the area of communication is that learning that a discussion, whatever you want to refer to it as, it's not a debate. I'm a debater at heart. I love a good debate, and Tabitha is about laughing over there. And I can debate till kingdom come over the dumbest thing you've ever heard about, but I will enjoy it the entire time. And I can walk away from the debate and be just fine. Now, a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people can't walk away from a heated debate and be like, friends. I'm like, shake your hand, like, hey, good to see you today. Glad that, I can walk away from that. And so for me, debating didn't affect me. And so when we first got married, one of the biggest things I had to learn communication-wise was this isn't a debate. We're not in debate class. This isn't a debate competition. There's really not a winner, and I think it's not about winning.
Right.
And there's a really good aspect that you mentioned that I think they need to hear as far as a mindset that going into an argument, going into a discussion, whatever you want to talk about, mention that mindset that you mentioned to me while we were talking about this.
Sure. Just going into it, remembering that there isn't a winner. I mean, that's the easiest thing. But then it's like you said. But I think the other question to really ask yourself is it really worth it? Is what we're fighting about, what we're arguing about, is it really worth just the time that we're arguing, the time that we're spending just barking at each other? Is that something that we're really benefiting from? I remember the silliest thing, but I
didn't know we were going to tell practical illustrations in this.
I'm gonna go back and give an illustration.
Great.
But
it's probably a bad one where I'm the bad guy. Let me guess.
I remember right when we got married, or we were getting ready to get married or something, and I had put a vacuum cleaner on our registry.
Oh, the vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
This was a breaking point for us almost. And the dumb vacuum cleaner.
But I had put a vacuum cleaner on our registry, and it wasn't the one that we had picked out together. And so for us, I got this vacuum cleaner in the mail, and I was just excited. And I remember Josh just being upset because it was a bigger vacuum cleaner, and it was something that he said, I want a smaller one. And I just remember thinking, it's really not that big of a deal. We'll just put it in the corner of our camper. It's not that big of a deal. But then when we opened up the package, it was so compact and so little. And he just looked at me and said, I am so sorry. I did not know it was that little.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. And, that was it really worth it? No, that was like one of the dumbest arguments I can remember. And, but I was pretty frustrated. I had lived in a camper for years and years and years. I grew up as a kid living in a fifth wheel. We traveled on the road for years in a Class A motorhome. And so I was used to motorhome living. You want everything smaller. And I remember, looking on the registry and there's a full-size vacuum. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. What in the world is she thinking? And come to find out it was a mini, It looks like a normal full-size vacuum in the picture, but when you get it, it's like this tiny little middle thing.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And so
I think if you can, but I think the important thing to do and remember is just to swallow your pride, just to die to self, and just to take the blame. For me, in that moment, I should have just said, I'm sorry. Let me go find the other vacuum and let me put that on the registry. But I didn't. So I struggled a lot with submission. So that wasn't easy to do, but I'm learning, and I'm still learning submission, definitely. But that's definitely something I had to work on.
Yeah. And, I'm not saying, like you had to work on that.
Sure,
just going to the next point. That can go both ways. the Bible says, submit yourselves one to another. So yes, a wife is supposed to submit to her husband. The husband is head of the wife. But husbands, at points, you submit to your wife as well, and submit to, her preference. It doesn't always have to be you. And it's, in that area, it's not the wife's job to always be the sacrificial lamb of the argument. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if the situation is allowable, just end it. Just apologize. Just be done with it. Now at times, I think, be clear on this as well. Right. At times, you don't need to cop out either. Right. At times, there's a root to the problem, and you don't need to just, punch out early, hit the time clock, and say, okay, I'm sorry, I'll take the blame, let's just end this. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there is a root to the problem, right, and you need to dig it out and cut it out and get rid of it. But, overall, the piddly, stupid stuff that you're going to look back at 5 years now and laugh at, like the dumb vacuum, just quit being prideful. Put your preferences away. Lock the door. Just take the blame, move on. It really does not matter. Most of these arguments, if you would just sit down and think about it, does this really matter? No. Then let's just get over with it. Just apologize, move on, swallow your pride, let them, we said there's no winners. Let them win and move on. And, in that area of learning to just swallow your pride and let them have their preference, you need to learn to sincerely apologize. This may be the most important thing, is learning to sincerely apologize. In the movies or whatever, you hear the little kids, the parents like, tell them you're sorry. And the kid's like, sorry. And that won't work with your spouse. In the area of communication, if we're at the end of a, argument and I'm like, sorry, that's not going to cut it. She's not going to be happy. And so you have to learn to sincerely apologize. Something a little bit longer, something a little bit more in depth, something a little bit more heartfelt. Tabitha, I am so sorry. I shouldn't have ... Will you please forgive me? And learning to sincerely apologize, and, bringing back those things that we talked about before, what can affect what actually was said was, your facial expression. If I'm like smiling like, I am so sorry, will you please forget, that's not going to work. Your tone and your focus. They can tell when you're thinking about something else and you're trying to apologize. It's not going to matter. So learn to sincerely apologize.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too is don't rush the apology. I know sometimes for me, communication just in general was hard for me. So going through and apologizing, it was one of those things where I was like, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry for, and I would say something really fast and just kind of look at them and be like, okay, are we good? We're good, right? And an apology isn't rushed. It's not fake. It doesn't come with an eye roll, because that happened quite a bit, I think, when we first got married. It doesn't come. It's just very just straight up. You communicate. You say I'm sorry, and you go into detail. Your spouse needs to know that you're sorry and what you're sorry for. So I think that's important too.
No, it's true. And so communication was big for us. And probably number one was communication. It was the biggest cause of our arguments. It was the biggest cause of our struggles, our troubles, was communication. And, today I'm not going into a lot of, what shall I say, like spiritual things. Hopefully, if you're a newlywed and you're solid Christians, hopefully you both are in church faithfully. Hopefully you're both having your Bible time. And those are other aspects, of marriages. Today I'm talking to those who are, they're solid Christians. They're moving forward together in life, and communication can be an issue, because coming from two different homes, you don't communicate the same. And so you have to learn to communicate. And that really, as far as the differences of home life, really leads to our next point on what we're going to talk about today in the 3 focal points for newlyweds. Communication was big for us, but what was the second one? And that is a good question. What is the next one? And I know you really want to hear what the next one is, but I'm going to make you wait. You're probably looking at the timestamp anyway. We're almost out of time. And so we're going to make you wait to listen to the rest of today's episode. And you can hear the rest of it next Friday. You can hear the rest of it next Friday, same time. same place, same people, me and my wife Tabitha, and we'll continue this episode next Friday, picking up exactly from this point, answering that question, moving forward to what is the next two topics. Really, the three focal points for newlyweds. What are the second two? And they're really important and things you're going to want to watch for. And so let me encourage you to come back next week to hear the remainder or the finish of this episode. I know I'm kind of leaving you on a cliffhanger, but, it's fun. It's fun on my part to leave you on a cliffhanger. And so today, I really hope that you enjoyed the episode. Of course, from us, Merry Christmas to you. Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas season. We are going to play another Christmas song for you. And this song today is going to come from the Sounds of Christmas CD. They're piano solos by David Webster. It's called The Sounds of Christmas. You can buy that CD at nvpublications.org. Again, that's NV standing for North Valley, nvpublications.org. Simply type in The Sounds of Christmas. You'll find a CD that has the piano solos by David Webster. And, of course, we play this song with permission from North Valley Publications. And today we're going to play a song that you've heard before. You've heard it, but you may not know the name to it. The title of it is Gesù Bambino. And you say, what in the world? It is an Italian Christmas carol that was composed in 1917. And so some of the melody and the lyrics of the chorus are derived from Adeste Fideles, which is, O Come All Ye Faithful. And it's an Italian Christmas carol, Gesù Bambino, which simply means baby Jesus. And undoubtedly, you've heard it before. It'll sound familiar once we actually play it. And so it's a Christmas song, Christmas carol, 1917. It's an old song. And so over 100 years old. And so we're going to play that song for you today, Gesù Bambino from The Sounds of Christmas, piano solos by David Webster. Again, you can add that CD to your collection by going to nvpublications.org. And so don't forget, you can hear the remainder of this episode next Friday, same time, same place, and we'll talk to you then. But for now, here's that Gesù Bambino, and you keep looking up and keep stirred up for the cause of Christ.